It was a humid evening in Guangzhou when 5 friends, Liang, Mei, Chen, Rui, and Jia, gathered near the gates of the abandoned textile factory. The factory had been closed for decades, its crumbling facade overrun by ivy and graffiti. Locals whispered that it was cursed. People who ventured inside were said to vanish without a trace. But the group, fueled by a mix of skepticism and bravado, decided to explore it. "It's just an old building," Liang said, pushing open the rusty gate. "Nothing to be afraid of." Inside, the air was stale and oppressive. The massive hall was filled with rusting machinery, the walls streaked with grime. As they moved deeper, a strange sound echoed, the rhythmic clinking of metal. "Is someone here?" Mei whispered, clutching Jia's arm. Chen shook his head. "Probably just the wind." But the clinking grew louder, more deliberate. They followed the sound to a row of ancient looms. To their horror, one of them was still running, the shuttle darting back and forth as if operated by an invisible hand. "This is impossible," Rui muttered. "The power's been out here for decades." Suddenly, Mei let out a shriek. "Look," she cried, pointing to the wall. Dim light revealed streaks of dark red, blood, dripping down the cracked concrete. The group froze, their breaths quickening. Then Liang spotted a ledger on a nearby table. Dust covered its leather cover, but when he opened it, the pages inside were disturbingly pristine. Written in neat, flowing script were the names of dozens of people, each accompanied by a date. The most recent entry was from 1992, the year the factory shut down. "These are names of missing people," Jia whispered. Before anyone could respond, the air grew colder. The faint hum of machinery turned into a low, guttural growl. A shadow flickered at the edge of their vision, then darted behind the looms. "We need to get out of here," Rui said, backing away. But the moment they turned, the exit was gone. The corridor they had entered through was now a solid wall of brick. Panic set in. Liang, determined to lead them out, suggested they head deeper into the factory in search of another way. As they moved, the shadows seemed to close in. Strange whispers filled the air, incoherent but undeniably human. They reached a stairwell leading to the basement. Against their better judgment, they descended. The basement was even colder, and the faint odor of decay hung in the air. At the center of the room was a massive pit, its edges lined with jagged metal. The walls were covered in strange symbols, painted in what looked like blood. This is some kind of ritual site," Chen said, his voice trembling. Suddenly, Jia let out a blood-curdling scream. She pointed to the pit, where a pair of glowing red eyes stared back at them. A skeletal figure, its flesh hanging in tatters, emerged from the shadows. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, as if it were a puppet on strings. "Run!" Liang shouted. But as they bolted for the stairs, Rui was yanked back by an unseen force. His screams echoed as he was dragged into the pit, the sound of tearing flesh silencing him. The remaining 4 stumbled back upstairs, their minds racing. "It's the curse," Mei sobbed. "We shouldn't have come here." The factory seemed to shift around them, the hallways warping and stretching. Doors appeared and disappeared at random. As they turned a corner, Chen vanished. One moment he was there, and the next, an inky black shadow engulfed him. His screams were cut short, leaving only a smear of blood on the floor. By now, Liang, Mei, and Jia were frantic. They found themselves back in the main hall, where the looms now ran in unison, the clinking deafening. The bloodstains on the walls had formed into grotesque faces, their mouths opening and closing as if laughing at their plight. "We're trapped," Mei whispered. Her eyes darted to the ledger, which now lay open on the floor. New names had appeared, written in fresh ink, Rui and Chen. "It's recording us," Jia realized, her voice trembling. "We're next." The skeletal figure reappeared, its red eyes blazing. It pointed a bony finger at Mei. She screamed as her body contorted unnaturally, her limbs bending at impossible angles. With a sickening crunch, she collapsed, lifeless. "We need to destroy the ledger," Liang said, his voice resolute. "It's the source of this." He grabbed the book and ran toward one of the looms. But as he tried to shove it into the machinery, the looms ground to a halt. The factory itself seemed to roar in anger. Jia grabbed a piece of metal debris and set the ledger on fire. The flames consumed it quickly, the names vanishing in the blaze. For a moment, the factory fell silent. But then the walls began to collapse. The machinery exploded into shards, and the skeletal figure let out an ear-piercing wail. Liang and Jia ran for their lives as the factory crumbled around them. They reached what had once been the entrance and stumbled out just as the building imploded, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust. Gasping for air, they looked back at the ruins. "It's over," Jia said, her voice shaky. But Liang shook his head. In his hand was the charred remains of the ledger. One name was still visible, his own. Before he could react, a shadow enveloped him, and he vanished. Jia stood alone, the oppressive silence of the night closing in. From the ruins, the faint clinking of metal began again. Her breath hitched as she realized the curse was far from over. A new sound pierced the air, the distant creak of the factory gates opening, as if inviting its next victims inside.